Okay, so my project right now is I'm recording an interview, and I'd like you to act as a reporter for Bemidji State University. I want you to interview me as if we're doing a TV interview. I want you to ask me questions about the projects that I've been using AI for. I'd like you to, kind of keep it on the lighter side, I guess. You are privy to a lot of the projects that I've been working on because I use ChatGPT a lot. So I want you to ask me about some of those projects and what I've been doing with those. Later in the interview, you can ask me maybe some more direct questions about criticisms of, AI systems. And then at the end, I would like to ask you a couple of questions and just see how this whole thing goes. I just want to, yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. Let's dive right in and do a little virtual TV interview. I'll put on my Bemidji State reporter hat. So, Eric, thanks for joining us today. To kick things off, could you tell us a bit about how you've been using AI in your various projects lately and what kind of things you've been working on?
Yeah, I guess I've been doing a lot of different crazy stuff. So I made a couple arcade games. Let's see, there's an arcade game back here. I used AI to create the AI player's behavior. It's called Bucky's Breakout. And yeah.
That sounds...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No problem at all. I was just going to say that sounds really fun and pretty inventive. It's awesome that you're using AI to give those arcade games some life, like in Bucky's Breakout. So let's keep it rolling. Could you share maybe one or two other creative projects where AI has been a big help for you?
Yeah, I've been making this bobblehead for a class project where I used Meshy AI to create the 3D model of my head, and I used Paul Bunyan's body to be the base. And then I used an AI voice cloning tool to recreate my voice. So every time you press a button on the toy, then it just spouts out different things that I might or may not say. So yeah, kind of an interesting thing there. I've also been working on a student film where I'm going to be filling in the backgrounds of some of my video with AI backgrounds just to up the production value a little bit, and when I can use an office but not wanting to bring in a bunch of books and different things like that. So yeah.
Wow, that is seriously cool and definitely creative. It sounds like you've really found a bunch of fun ways to weave AI into all sorts of projects. And that bobblehead idea with your voice, honestly, that sounds like a hit. I can imagine it's a blast for the class. So let's shift gears a little bit. I know you also want to chat about some of the more critical angles. How do you feel about the concerns people have around AI? Like maybe the ethical stuff or the idea that AI might replace human creativity? What's your take on that?
I feel a bunch of different ways about this. I love using AI for things that are maybe less creative, like
Yeah.
coding and things like that. I like to reserve some of the tasks for, the artistic stuff to myself. I feel like that's where I shine and that's where I want to work. But I don't necessarily want to hand off all of my creative energy to somebody else. And I don't want to spend all of my time learning how to do all these different things that I don't already know how to do. I know it would probably be useful for me, but I'm just interested in such a wide variety of topics that it's really hard to become an expert in any one thing. You kind of have to just go down that lane, and I just want to pick and choose different, creative buffet options rather than sticking to just one thing. So.
Absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. It's like you're using AI as a really handy tool to handle the more technical or maybe less artistic bits so that you can focus on the parts where your creativity really shines. And that totally makes sense, especially if you're dabbling in a whole bunch of different areas. It's like you get to curate your own little creative buffet, like you said. So that's a great perspective. All right, to wrap things up on my end, before we flip it around and you ask me a question or two, is there anything else you want to highlight about your projects or anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I guess I'd like maybe a couple more questions back and forth. I should have given you a time limit. I'd like to go maybe about 5 minutes longer, 10 minutes longer with questions directed my way, and then we'll switch to asking you some questions about AI. And I would maybe appreciate a prompt or two in the direction of some of the projects you've helped me work on, and maybe just a quick little bit of your perspective on maybe how it was to help. I don't know.
Of course, we can absolutely do that. We'll take our time with it. So let's keep rolling for another 5 or 10 minutes of me asking you a couple more questions, and then we'll flip it around. So just to dig a little deeper into your projects, you mentioned things like using AI for background generation of your student film or creating those bobbleheads. Is there any particular project that you felt was the most challenging or that really put you to learn something new with AI? And then after that, we can totally switch over and you can ask me a couple of things.
Oh man. Gosh, I don't know. There's definitely been, I guess, one of the challenging parts is we've been trying to work with LoRa's on our local AI computer that's all beefed up for AI. And what our goal is, I guess, is to have people draw in their own style and train the AI based on their own artistic style, so that they can maybe whip something out really quick and show to a client before going and doing the actual work for it, or just using it as a shortcut to make different digital illustrations. And a challenge for me was collecting my source images and then trying to actually make that LoRa work on the AI computer. I think we were using Comfy UI and Krita to make that work, but it had a really cool feature where you could paint or draw or digitally illustrate in one side, and then you would see a live updated AI generated image based on the formatting and everything that you were doing in one side on the other screen. So it was really challenging, but it was also really fun to set up. And yeah, I guess I've been spending a lot of time just doing all sorts of different projects. Like the other day I used an AI tool, Emergent, and I used it to create a clone, an app clone of Google Translate that would translate from English to Ojibwe and back again, or vice versa, I should say. And it worked really well. It was limited in its function because Ojibwe and English have tons of words. And so we were kind of struggling with that a little bit, but it worked really well to clone it. And it's kind of an issue with Google Translate that it doesn't translate back and forth between Ojibwe. So it was kind of a cool project to work on.
Yeah, that's really awesome and definitely sounds like a good challenge. I mean, just hearing all that, it's clear you've got a ton of different irons in the fire and you're really using AI in such a variety of ways. And that whole idea of letting people train the AI on their own art style, that's a super neat way to let folks kind of have a personalized creative shortcut, which is really innovative. And yeah, working with a language like Ojibwe, I can imagine that's both rewarding and a bit tricky since there's so many nuances. But it's really cool to hear you've been pushing through that. All right, so let's flip it around. Feel free to ask me anything you like about AI or anything else you're curious about, and we'll keep going from there.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess one question I have, a couple common criticisms, I guess. One is that AI can maybe erode our own skills, that we're learning. If I learn to do something, but then I export that job to AI over a long period of time, I might myself lose those skills or not be able to go out and do them on my own. I guess what would you say to those criticisms that you've heard from people or that I'm bringing up to you now?
Yeah, that's definitely a really fair question and a concern a lot of people have. I think the way to look at it is that AI can be kind of like a tool or a partner rather than a replacement. So it's really about how you choose to use it. If you use AI to handle the repetitive stuff or maybe to speed up certain parts of the process, you can still keep honing your own skills in the areas that matter most to you. It's kind of like any other technology. Like once upon a time, people were using calculators when no one would ever learn math, but really it just changes what you focus on. So I think as long as you keep a balance and keep practicing the things that are important to you, AI can just be a really handy assistant rather than something that takes away your skills.
Great. Another question, sometimes there's a misconception that's brought up that AI uses a lot of power or a lot of water. So I guess my question is, how resource intensive is AI versus the traditional means of trying to get something done? Do you have any research on that or any comments on that, like based on data that you could share?
Yeah, definitely a good question and something that comes up a lot in discussions about AI's footprint. So it's true that training these big AI models can be pretty resource intensive, especially the really large ones. They do use a lot of computational power that can translate into energy use. And sometimes the cooling systems for big data centers do use water for cooling. But in comparison to traditional methods, it really depends on what you're doing. In a lot of cases, AI can actually save resources in the long run by making things more efficient or by automating stuff that would take a lot of human energy or a lot of physical resources. So it's a bit of a balance. There's definitely an environmental impact, and there's a lot of ongoing research into making AI more energy efficient. But overall, it's just one of those things where the technology is evolving, and the goal is definitely to make it as efficient and as eco-friendly as possible. So it's a valid concern, and I think a lot of people in the field are working on making it better.
Do you have any concrete examples of where AI can save effort or energy or water versus a traditional method of doing something using AI?
Yeah, absolutely. A concrete example might be something like in agriculture, AI can be used to optimize irrigation systems. So instead of watering a whole field the traditional way, you have an AI that figures out exactly which parts of the field need water and how much. That can save a ton of water and energy compared to just watering everything equally. Another example might be in something like logistics and transportation. If you have AI optimizing delivery routes, it can figure out the most fuel efficient way to get from point A to point B, saving gas, saving time, and overall reducing the energy footprint. So there's definitely some ways that AI can be used to actually cut down on resource use compared to traditional methods.
So I guess with those two examples, I can see how it's making those processes a little bit more efficient, but it could also, because it's still using AI plus the traditional stuff that it's using, do you think that it would get up to the same level of energy and water consumption, regardless, because we're using AI to make those things more efficient, but it still has a cost to using those systems?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's definitely a balancing act because using AI does come with its own costs, like you said. So even if it's making something more efficient in one way, there's still an energy cost to running those AI systems. The hope and the goal is that over time, the efficiencies outweigh those extra costs. But you're right, it's not always a perfect trade-off, and it really depends on how the AI is implemented and how energy efficient those systems become. So it's kind of an evolving field. There's definitely a cost, but the idea is that if you do it right, you end up saving more resources than you use, and there's a lot of ongoing work to make sure that balance is in favor of efficiency.
How would you compare certain tasks that are done in the field that, like, the the department that I typically work in is technology, art, and design at Bemidji State here, and how would you compare some of those tasks? You know, if I was going to maybe code a video game using AI versus doing it the traditional way, do you think I would spend more resources learning that and using the internet to teach myself those methods and then working on it for a certain amount of time on a computer versus, you know, offloading that project to an AI which can get it done much faster? Do you have any research or any data that would suggest using AI would be much more efficient than using computers in the traditional way to learn through coding your game?
Yeah, that's a really interesting comparison. And I think it does highlight that using AI can be a huge time saver, especially in fields like tech, art, and design, where you might be spending a lot of hours learning new tools or coding something from scratch. There's not always a one size fits all data point, but generally, When people use AI for things like generating code snippets or automating parts of a game design, it can cut down the time pretty significantly. So instead of spending weeks learning a particular kind of code from scratch, you might get a working prototype in a few days or even a few hours. And that means you're using less of your own energy and maybe less of your machine's energy in the long run. Of course, there is an upfront cost in terms of the AI's own resource use, but it often balances out because you're not doing all that manual trial and error yourself. So overall, yeah, in a field like yours, using AI can definitely be more efficient in many cases.
Can you back up some of what you're saying with some actual data? Like if I was going to, let's just say for 2 hours, research and code versus doing that in 2 minutes using AI. Can you give me kind of a, I guess, comparison on 2 minutes using AI versus 2 hours using a computer and working on something like that, just in resource use between the two?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. So, to be honest, it can be a little tricky to give you a hard data point on exactly how much resource difference there is because it really depends on the task and the AI system. But generally speaking, if you think about it like this, if you're spending 2 hours of your time coding and using your computer, you're basically running your machine for those 2 hours and using your own mental energy. If you have a AI do it in a couple of minutes, you're still using some computing power, but you're condensing that time dramatically. So the idea is you're saving your own time and probably some energy in the process. In terms of exact numbers, it's a bit variable, but the general consensus is that for many tasks, AI can do it faster and with a bit less overall human energy and probably a bit less machine energy in some cases because it's not running as long. But yeah, it does depend on the situation, and it's a good thing to keep in mind that it's not always a perfect one-to-one comparison.
Do you have any data that would, put at ease some minds on the water usage thing? I know that I've seen that come up a number of times, especially because we live in a state, we live in Minnesota, and water use is kind of a big sticking point for us. I think I heard last time that they were going to be building 5 different AI server plants that would use the same amount of energy as the residential usage in Minnesota. But I'm not sure how water usage goes. The water I think is used to just cool the systems and is not, like gone forever. But is there anything you can say or that you would point out that makes the water usage issue less of a concern for people?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good local concern, especially in a place like Minnesota where water usage is a big deal. So you're right that the water is primarily used in cooling these big data centers. And in those cases, it's not like the water is just disappearing. It's cycled through cooling systems and then it's returned often back into the environment. So it's not like it's being consumed in the same way as, say, drinking water or irrigation water. It's more of a cooling loop. That said, it does still use water, and it's definitely something that people are looking into. But one thing that makes it a bit less of a concern is that a lot of new data centers and AI facilities are trying to use more sustainable cooling methods. So they're working on ways to reduce that water footprint or to use recycled water, things like that. So while it is a real concern, it's not quite as drastic as it might sound because most of the water isn't actually being lost, and there are definitely efforts to make it more efficient. So it's a valid concern, but one that the industry is aware of and trying to improve on.
Awesome. I think I would like you to ask me a couple more questions again that are more general questions that would be from the perspective of somebody who's either going into the TAD program or is at the TAD program that's going to be using AI, and maybe some questions that would be more pertinent to Bemidji State University students. Maybe for another 5 minutes or so.
Absolutely, let's do that. I'll put on my Bemidji State hat again and think like a TAD student. So let's say I'm a new student in the Technology, Art, and Design program here at Bemidji State, and I'm just starting to explore using AI in my projects. What would you say are some first steps or maybe some easy wins for a student like me to get started with AI tools? And on top of that, are there any specific resources or classes at Bemidji that we think would be super helpful for someone in the TAD program who wants to dive into AI?
Gosh, yeah. So there's actually a new AI course being started that's being taught by Eric Carlson. We also have a AI group. Right now it's just me, Eric Carlson, and Gavin, and I'm forgetting his last name right now. But Gavin is a great guy. He knows way more about this stuff than I do, and obviously Eric does too. Eric is doing a class coming up talking about AI, where the students are going to be doing some history projects, and they're going to be using some AI to develop some, artistic projects or whatever, or developing projects that will show why AI is so bad, or why they're so against it personally, and how to avoid those things. I think it is really important to understand that AI is not going away, and that it's a tool that we can either use or learn how to work around in an ethical way. Do you want to ask me a couple more questions that would be useful for somebody in the TAD department to know, or questions that they might ask, or maybe even concerns that they would have with using AI as part of a TAD degree at BSU?
Absolutely, let's do that. So if I were a TAD student, I might be curious first, what are some of the coolest AI tools that you found really easy to integrate into your TAD projects? And second, do you think there are any common words students have about using AI in their creative work, like concerns about originality or just feeling overwhelmed? And how would you reassure them? Feel free to dive in and share your thoughts, and we'll just treat it like a little TAD Q&A.
I've worked with quite a few different AI tools. I mean, they're not all created equal, and there's such a proliferation right now that it's really hard to sort through what is good and what's not good, or what is ethical and not ethical. So some of these upcoming courses within the TAD department are going to be really crucial for someone who's going to be a creative in the industry to navigate all of these things. And it's going to be changing every few days, it seems like. And there's so much out there. I was just watching TV the other day, and there was a fully AI generated ad. And that happens like way more frequently now, because a studio, or let's say a company who's going to advertise themselves, they're probably much more likely just looking at their bottom line. And if they can generate a video using AI for a couple $100, and an artist, or prompt engineer can generate that for them, rather than them having a videographer and a very expensive camera and cast and crew and writing it and directing it and all those different things. I can see why it would be very tempting and maybe even untenable for a business to want to use AI in their promotion and advertisements. So this is the thing that we're going to be fighting against, and we don't want to bury our heads in the sand and become non-competitive just because there's a brand new tool on the market. I think that we need to embrace it and learn how we can still be creative and still be happy in our industries, and use these tools rather than ignoring them completely. So.
Absolutely. I think you've got a really great perspective on that. It's all about staying adaptable and kind of embracing the tools as they come. And you're right, for TAD students or any creatives, the key is learning how to use AI. It's just one more tool in the toolbox rather than seeing it as a threat. And like you said, just because there's a new tool out there doesn't mean we have to lose our creativity. It's really about blending the two together. So I think that's a great note for anyone in the TAD program. Just keep learning, keep experimenting, and you'll stay ahead of the curve.
All right. Let's see here. Are there, you've worked with me on a lot of these projects. Are there projects that I'm failing to mention that you think would be worthy to bring up in this interview?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got so many cool projects going on. And I think one that might be really fun to mention is the Yatso News series you've been planning. It's a super creative use of AI to help with historical storytelling, and it's got that fun twist of blending humor and education. So that could be a neat one to highlight. And of course, there's your film project Perception. That's another big one where you're weaving AI themes into the storyline itself. Those are both projects that really show how you're not just using AI for the sake of it, but actually making it part of the creative process. So I think those would be awesome to mention as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the not so news. I haven't really done anything with that for a long time, but at one point, yeah, I was developing maybe an idea for a YouTube series that would be geared towards high school students, where it's sort of like um, a news station, but they're covering historical events live. So they'd say, hey, we're going to throw it to Tommy Kirkhaw, and he's in the Oval Office right now with Abraham Lincoln as he signs the, Declaration of Independence. And then, we'd cut to him and, whatever, because there's obviously not any video footage of events like that. And I thought about using AI to sort of recreate some of those events, or even just for some of the scripting and different things like that. But yeah, so that was one project. And then Perception, yeah, I'm working on Perception really hard right now. And the main plot points of that movie are people using an AI implant to perceive their best version of the world that they live in, and how that can be detrimental, because if you're seeing everything through rose-colored glasses, then you're not adapting to the real world, and you have no real coping skills when something goes wrong. And I think that's, kind of the scarier inevitability of some of these tools, is that it's going to, I guess it's going to be incumbent on us to be very, very educated and very intentional about how we use some of these AI tools, so that we're not becoming dependent on them, or eroding some of their own things about us that make us human by having this giant, I don't know, overpowered tool that can always do everything better than us.
Yeah, I think you've summed that up really thoughtfully. It's definitely a balancing act, and it's cool that you got these projects that really reflect that. Like Perception, you're exploring the themes of what happens when we rely too much on that rose-colored view and lose touch with reality. And I think you're spot on that it's all about intentionality, being really mindful about how we use these tools so that we stay creative and human and don't let the tools kind of overrun us. So yeah, those projects are a great testament to that balance, and I think they'd be really interesting to bring up in NMBU. Thanks for sharing that.
What else would you say to TAD students about the use of AI to encourage them into the program?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say to them that AI is really just another creative frontier. It's like having a super versatile tool in your kit that can help you experiment, speed up some of the technical stuff, and let you focus more on the parts of the work that really light you up creatively. And in the TAB program, you're going to get with support and the guidance to figure out how to use it in a way that fits your own vision. So just dive in and have fun with it.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
You're so welcome. I'm glad we could chat through all of that. If you need anything else, just let me know.